It is time for the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast for Thursday, where we're going 137 on the rotation number all the way to the end of the card. Our first guest up, 137 down to 162 on your rotation numbers. Teddy covers. Teddy, welcome into the podcast.
Hey, great to be here, Drew. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to talk some college football?
Every week I'm excited to talk college football, man. I love this stuff. There's something about a passion for college football. You know, when I'm digging through box scores, and man, it's Saturday night and Sunday morning, it's a scramble when you're digging through those box scores. And yet, you know, all the game recaps, all the coaches' quotes. I mean, it really is. It's a lot of work. But when you're doing it, you're like, oh, look at this tidbit. I'm going to use that. You know, you get that little warm feeling in your belly. You're like, oh, I found something that's good. Oh, wow, look at that. I don't know how many other people notice that. You know, so there's something about that despite the workload, I really enjoy it, man. I do. There's a passion for college football that hopefully comes out on the podcast.
Well, let's get after it. 137, 138 here. Houston, ECU. Looks like Houston laying 16 on the highway, 69.5 the total, Teddy.
Yeah, and really, I mean, Houston's going to get theirs. East Carolina's defense, I think, is going to have a very hard time slowing down the Cougs. The Cougs have been playing fast. I mean, the Cougs have scored 40-plus in every game so far this season, despite the fact they've only covered 2-point spreads all year long because their defense hasn't quite lived up to expectation. My question about the Pirates is whether they can trade points, and whether they can trade. They can't trade points with Houston, I don't think, but whether they can score enough to hang within this number. And of course, you know, if East Carolina is going to score, I think this game has a good chance to get up and over the total. Reed Herring has had some decent games this year, but when you look at him against the better defenses, you know, USF, 48 pass attempts, only completed 21 of them. And averaging less than 5 yards per attempt. Last week against Temple, 17 of 31, just 112 yards on 31 pass attempts. That's not a downfield passing game, and that's definitely a concern for me for the Pirates this week. You know, last year, Houston had very little trouble, 52-27 against this squad, and I would be surprised if it's a similar, relatively one-sided affair this year. And that's if East Carolina can score points. They can. It could get ugly.
Teddy, let's head to the MAC. We got some action with Akron at Buffalo. Looks like Buffalo bet up now. A lot of money coming in on the Bulls. Open 9 up to 12. 53.5 the total. This game in Buffalo, Teddy.
Yeah, then the markets haven't known what to do with Buffalo. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, the money was pouring in. Well, I shouldn't say that. The money came in on Rutgers. Remember, Buffalo played Rutgers, and they got steamed up. They closed 6.5, 7 from an opener of 3, and they blew them out. And then the money came on them the next week. They got steamed all the way up to 7 against Army, and then Army blew them out. And then last week against Central, the money came on Central. It came against Buffalo. I guess right before kickoff, they took a little bit of money, but they ended up winning that game in large part due to a +3 turnover margin. Although they were in control throughout that contest, you know, 5-1. The Bulls are 1 win away from clinching bowl eligibility at home. It's a big game for Buffalo. I can understand why the markets are, I'm not going to say excited about this team, but why there's been a fair bit of support for Buffalo, even though we've seen, you know, they've been a popular team to bet on. I'll just put it that way, even though the markets haven't gotten them right week in, week out. You know, you look at the other side of the equation, and here's an Akron squad that, you know, I had them in the game against Northwestern. They won that game straight up as 21-point dogs, and I'm telling you, they were down 21-3 at halftime, and I thought it was a dead nuts loser. The defense is capable of making plays. They have created turnovers. In fact, 4 games they played, they created 10 turnovers. And that's something that hasn't been a problem for Buffalo at all. Buffalo's only committed more than 1 turnover in 1 of their 6 games this season. So the Zips D can create turnovers. Their offense is very, very pedestrian. And the game against Northwestern, the Wildcats fell asleep. The game against Iowa State, where they were in it throughout, covered wire to wire, even though they lost by 13. Again, the spot wasn't great for the favorite. I think the Zips might be a notch or 2 overvalued right now. It would be Buffalo or pass for this better.
And Teddy, before we get too far, I want to let all the listeners know we do have a 7-day all-access pass that will give you access to Teddy's NFL, college football, and we got NBA starting early next week. So you get those 3 sports for 7 days. And we're doing Teddy Half. Those words, TEDDYHALF, Teddy Half, for half off of that. That's a $50 savings at checkout. So that's a 7-day all-access pass. Keep in mind, guys, he's 70% on his big tickets since early August, 5-2 last weekend, 72% in the NFL year-to-date, 59% in college football year-to-date. Teddy Covers killing it on the betting markets. So remember that Teddy half at checkout to get Teddy's all-access 7 days for just half off. Teddy heading to the Conference USA, 141-142 Marshall at Old Dominion. Looks like Marshall, the Thundering Herd, laying 3.5 on the highway, 59.5 the total.
I mean, Marshall can't find a quarterback right now. You know, Doc Holliday's playing a little QB shuffle, and the turnovers again. You know, at this stage of the season, the turnover data really starts to matter to me. And the teams that aren't protecting the football are not teams I want my money on. And here's Marshall the last 4 games: 4 turnovers, 3 turnovers, 4 turnovers, 3 turnovers. Obviously, it's cost them. They failed to cover the spread in any of those contests, and you know, including last week's home loss as favorites to Middle Tennessee State. So it's not a team I'm particularly excited about getting the betting window with, even though if they were able to solve the turnover issues, they're a lot better than Old Dominion. Old Dominion, you know, I mean, they had their one moment of glory this season, obviously with one of the upsets of the year against Virginia Tech. That's the only game they've won. The only other game they've covered was against East Carolina. We talked about that a minute ago as not being a particularly good defensive squad. If Marshall can clean things up, they're supposed to win this game and win it by margin. But it's hard for me to trust a team that's playing QB shuffle that turns the ball over every single week.
Staying in Conference USA with a team you briefly mentioned, MTSU, Middle Tennessee State, going down to Miami to play FIU, Butch Davis and company. 56.5 the total. And Teddy, this number kind of surprised me. We got FIU laying 3 at home. As far as my numbers go, this is the wrong team favored. I may be off. I got to admit I'm not 100% on both of these teams, but this FIU team, the Panthers, laying 3 at home surprised me. What do you say about it?
Well, let me just check my number here. I had the game at Pick'em.
Yeah.
So I'm not, but that's a pure power rating number, and it doesn't factor in the situation. This is situation. FIU's coming off a bye. And we talk about October buys, they matter. You know, Middle Tennessee just played a tough road game and now has to play another tough road game. So from a situational standpoint, the teams off the bye are going to get market spread. And also, let's not forget, Florida International really quietly, way underneath the radar, dating back to last year. I think, 6 in a row against FBS foes they've covered. They covered all 4 lines. This year they covered against Miami through the back door and all 3 previous games. So they've been a good point spread team. The quarterback play has been solid. They haven't been turning the ball over. There are things to like about FIU, but of course, Middle Tennessee State, you got, how long Stock's still been there. I'm talking about the quarterback, not the coach. It feels like he's been there for 20 years, dude. I was talking about him in like the 80s.
Well, if you add up both of their 10 years, it probably is close to 20 years.
Yeah. But, when you talk about the coach's son, senior quarterback, he's the type of kid you trust to make good decisions on the road. And there is a case to be made for Middle Tennessee State, I think, from a pure power rating standpoint. Obviously, with my number being Pick'em, the Blue Raiders, from a pure talent perspective, are the better of these 2 teams. I just do worry about the spot for Middle Tennessee, although that's the only way I would look at it, would be the road team taking the points, despite Florida International's strong ATS record of late.
Yeah, no, good breakdown. And Stockstill, outside of the big names, in the G5, like the McKenzie Miltons, he's right there, man. He is good. You mentioned coach's sons. He makes the right decisions, doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot. But you also mentioned, Teddy, FIU, Butch Davis. I think part of it is Lane Kiffin right up the road gets so many headlines that FIU kind of under the radar. You think there could be betting value going forward on them still?
Well, I mean, there's certainly been early season betting value, being that they covered every number against a D1 foe. When you talk about teams that are 4-0 ATS against the FBS competition and say, how much money am I going to make with this squad for the rest of the season? You can't anticipate that those squads that have been great money makers in September will continue to cash at that clip in October and November. And obviously, given the fact that FIU is laying in this ballgame, is telling us the betting markets aren't sleeping. on the Panthers.
All right, let's get some more action here. We got Kent State at Miami of Ohio, 59.5 the total. Looks like Miami laying 11 at home.
I haven't seen anything to like about Kent State this year. And when I say anything, I mean like anything. There were a handful of times where I thought, all right, hey, this is a spot. Let's see what they could do. Hasn't been there. Woody Barrett at the QB position. Again, very pedestrian. Had a good game against Ohio last week. Had a pretty good game against Ball State the week before that. They're balanced offensively. Justin Rankin can run the football. Isaiah McCoy has been their big play threat at wide receiver. But, defensively, the Golden Flashes are a little bit rough. They had a pretty good game last week, but that had largely to do with turnovers. They were able to force 4. And that made a big difference in hanging tough at Ohio. But Miami's a class here. We saw last week with the blowout win at Akron, outgained it by 160 yards, won the turnovers back-to-back, actually 3 straight weeks now that Miami's been winning the turnover battle. The defense is forcing. The offense isn't getting into trouble with creating them. So I can understand why Miami's laying doubles in this ballgame, even though the markets are not thrilled about that particular price range. We've seen a fair bit of money on the underdog over the course of the last 24 hours.
Heading out to the Mountain West, we got UNLV at Utah State. This is a tough one here for the Rebels, Teddy. 63.5 the total, 27.5 Utah State laying at home. How would you look to bet this one? And anything particular on UNLV, what their quarterback's out?
Yeah, Armani Rogers is out. And, without him last week, the team collapsed. It was as about an ugly a loss as you're ever going to see. They were laying 9. They got blown with a 50-14 final. It wasn't that close. That game was over in the first quarter, and they were lifeless. One thing that we look at in college football is the team off their worst performance. What do they do the next week? And UNLV in the Sanchez era has had their fair share of bad efforts and bad losses. And fairly consistently, they've been able to bounce back. They've been good road underdogs. And for as much as we like Utah State, again, you talk about the teams that cover every point spread, that are coming off a big national TV win against their arch rival last week. Road trip to Wyoming next week for a revenge game against the Cowboys. It's fairly easy to picture the Aggies looking past UNLV. They beat them 52-28 here in Las Vegas last year. And, Matt Wells' squad, they're so explosive offensively. That's my biggest concern. You say, all right, spot-wise, you have to think that Utah State lets down. You have to think that UNLV brings a little bit more to the table than they did last week. Spot-wise, it's surely a Rebel spot. But, when you talk about the teams that make the explosive plays, that have the quick strike offenses like Utah State does, great. UNLV hangs for a half, and all of a sudden, boom, boom, quick touchdown. And now you're hanging on, trying to hang on for a cover in the fourth quarter. In this price range can be a little bit stressful and doesn't always cash those tickets. So I lean to the Rebels. I doubt I get to the betting window. My powering number came out much shorter than the line in this one.
Staying in the Mountain West, Teddy, we got 149, 150 on the rotation numbers. New Mexico at Colorado State. Seeing ones for New Mexico. Pick'ems out there. 65.5 the total, Teddy. So
are you superstitious at all?
I don't want to be, but I got to admit I am.
Sure, we all are in our own ways, in our own little quirks. And I'm not. I don't have like a lucky rabbit's foot or anything. None of that. None of that silly business. But one thing that I never do, I never write down a win in my spreadsheet and update my page till the game's over. But last week, it was in the third quarter. Colorado State led 28-0 at San Jose. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to update the page and update the records and all that. I'm like, I got to play on the Rams -3, and they were actually down at 2.5. And between when I started updating it, by the end of it, San Jose State, who was lifeless, 28-0. They came out in the third quarter, a 3-and-out punt. By the end of that third quarter, San Jose State led 30-28. And I'm like, I'm never, so help me, I haven't learned this lesson before. I will never do this again. And then Colorado State, of course, finally got a stop. And back-to-back touchdowns, ended up winning the game by double digits, and all was well that ended well. But it's one of those deals like, no, man, you can't. Don't write down that W until somebody takes a knee. That being said, in some ways, Colorado State killed that team last week. And in some ways, when you look at this squad and saying, wow, here's a Colorado State team. The athletes are there. They weren't projected to be a bottom feeder in this conference. They got off to a really rough start. Nothing went right for them the first month of the season. Things are getting better. They came out of a bye. They got a win they needed. Now they're home against a beatable team. If they're going to make a run, this is where they're going to do it. And all the quotes after the game were, hey, that's one. We need more. So there's certainly a thought process for Colorado State where this squad's the underrated commodity right now. You make the same case for Bob Davies' squad. You say, all right, there was nothing. It wasn't a team that was well regarded in the markets. New Mexico's an afterthought in the Mountain West. Year in, year out, when Davie has a good team, they're an afterthought, and they cover a bunch of point spreads. They lose that home to Liberty, a 6.5-point chalk. Blasted against Wisconsin, all that. There's a lot of concerns. Then all of a sudden, last week, the win against the Rebels. Now we're seeing respect for New Mexico in the markets. Certainly, Davie's got a pretty good track record on the highway over the extent of his tenure. I don't know that Colorado State's defense is built to stop a really creative New Mexico offense. But on the other hand, Colorado State's offense is pretty good of their own, and there's no reason to think they won't be able to chuck the football all day long against a Lobos defense that has more than their fair share of concerns when it comes to being able to stop potent passing games.
Teddy, when you bring up New Mexico and always an afterthought, a couple years ago they had an athletic quarterback, that option, that spread option running around. I found them fun to watch and
very fun to watch, but they're not a team that ever gets any hype in the Mountain West. It's a back. Albuquerque is not a place that people end up. You know what I mean? When they're like, it's not a college football hotbed,
right?
And there's no hype there. San Diego State's get some hype once in a while. Boise gets some hype. Whatever. When Colorado State's good, they get some hype. Fresno's gotten some hype. New Mexico, even when they were good, and again, the best season they've had, they went 7-6 one year and 9-4 the next. That's the only two winning seasons they've had in 7 under Bob Davie.
All righty, we got 151, 152, Troy at Liberty. The Trojans, they lost a lot, but they really have. You got to tip your cap. I mean, they've played pretty well this year. They're laying 9 on the highway. This one could be affected by this hurricane / now tropical storm, which, by the way, Teddy, I didn't know enough about it, but it looked devastating on the Florida Panhandle. So anybody out there, be safe if you're in the path. But 63.5 the total in this one. Troy traveling to Liberty. What are you thinking about betting this one?
Yeah, boy, we're starting to like Neil Brown. Not that if you didn't like Neil Brown already, he's had a winning spread record every year at Troy, and you remember that loss in the opener against Boise and all the quotes from that game where Brown's like, I'm hoping we'll be ready for the start of Sunbelt play. We're really young. We replaced all of this. It's going to be a process. And lo and behold, since that loss to Boise, 5-0 straight up, 5-0 against the spread, and nothing fraudulent about any of them. Winning the turnover battle, winning the yardage battle. The defense has been there, chucking the football around, running the football effectively. Troy's been a very impressive team over the first, since that loss to Boise. You worry about the spot a little bit. They're winning and covering and killing everyone. After this is the bye. So do they come in here and have that same, we've seen it happen all the time where they come in, they blow somebody out in the first half, and then all of a sudden someone falls asleep and everyone falls asleep, and next thing you know, it's a much tighter than expected contest, whether it's a look ahead or whether it's a look ahead game on tap like Washington had in the second half against UCLA last week, or look ahead, hey, next week we get the week off. Liberty can score, that offense is 52-41 the last 2 weeks against New Mexico State. Troy's defense is a good notch, do better than that. But, one thing the Flames that we've seen, they can chuck the football around. And I wouldn't be surprised if this one ends up being a relatively high-scoring affair.
Teddy, Pitt at Notre Dame. Man, how do you bet against Notre Dame, and how do you bet on Pitt in this one? 54 the total. Looks like Notre Dame laying 21 or 20.5. That is the ultimate equalizer, but this one in South Bend. How would you look to bet Pitt Notre Dame, Teddy?
Oh, well, how do you bet against Pitt? It really says it's simple. You either go to your betting app on your phone and you find game number 153 and you click on it, or you go to the betting window and you say, hey, I'm going to bet on Pitt, number 153, and you give them money.
Yeah, but they'd probably say, what are you doing, Teddy? I mean, that's crazy.
They've never, every time I've been to a sportsbook, they never said, what are you doing? That's crazy. They say, yes, sir. Can I get you another wager? Please check your ticket before leaving the counter.
Touche.
Yeah. So you can totally make a case for Pitt here.
Go do it.
Sure. Okay. Let's start with this. It's a big letdown spot for Notre Dame. And I mean a legitimate letdown spot for Notre Dame. We're not talking about one big game, for the Irish. We're talking about multiple big games for the Irish. Stanford 1 week, Virginia Tech on the road the next week. They got the quirky offensive Navy to prepare for next week. The bye, coming up. And then Navy. You wonder if the Irish, take their foot off the gas here a little bit. Notre Dame also with that potential, hey, let's take care of business early. Oh, after we got the bye coming, you worry about the second half. If I'm taking the Irish, I'll take them first half. Same thing like we were talking about with Troy. When you look at Notre Dame's track record, Notre Dame's real great team, elite team. Look what happens when Notre Dame lays double digits at home. This isn't their role in the Brian Kelly year. It really hasn't been this year. They've been home favorites twice, laying doubles. They beat Ball State by 8. They beat Vandy by 5. And then here's Pitt, who found a way to grind out a win last week against Syracuse, a Pitt team that, they had a bad loss to Penn State. That was a fluky game, and that was a second half run out. And Pitt was vulnerable to that. They had the bad loss at Central Florida, where they got ran out, and the defense was really struggled against those athletes. But Narduzzi's a defensive guy. You would expect him to have a decent scheme against Book and a QB that, again, getting maybe a little bit too much hype for where he is at his stage of his progression. I think there's a much better case to be made for Pitt, for taking with Pitt than there is for laying with Notre Dame. I don't see any value in this spot, laying 21 with the Irish against a solid foe. I mean, say what you want about Pitt. They're not great, but they're not pushovers either.
Teddy, what about the finding change? We found it with Notre Dame in the quarterback switch to Ian Book, and since the switch, 3-0 straight up, 3-0 ATS. So you think the Pitt's still the side if you had to play it over the finding change with the Notre Dame team, got the spark. You're right. I mean, 21 is a lot, but still, 3-0 ATS since the change is a lot as well.
3-0 to the over as well. But again, what I'm trying to do in general, just like a core handicap philosophy, what are the markets not pricing correctly? I'm not looking at Notre Dame with Book, and boy, we saw the money pour in on the Irish last week. We saw it pour in on the Irish the week before. We're seeing them as 21-point chalk this week. I'm not seeing Notre Dame as a team that the markets are sleeping on, that they're not paying attention to the change with Ian Book behind QB. So, yeah, they're a better team now than they were with Wimbush behind center. But have the markets noticed that? You bet they have.
Yeah. No, good point. Great argument for Pitt. Let's move down here. 155, 156, Colorado at USC. Looks like 57 the total. And this one, a good one to shop around. Sportsmemo Odds has a bunch of books at 7, some at 7.5. So depending on which side you like, this is a good one to make sure you're betting at the right book to either have 7 or 7.5. But how would you look to bet this pretty big Pac-12 matchup here in Los Angeles?
It's a huge Pac-12 matchup. The winner of this game is in the driver's seat to go to the Pac-12 title game. I don't know. It's early. It's October. You don't want to think about this much stuff too much at this stage of the campaign. But I'll tell you what. Mike McIntyre's thinking about it. Where'd my McIntyre quote go? I have it here somewhere.
Yeah, and this is a good. I love that it's at 7:30 Pacific time, so it's the kind of the degenerate special, but not too degenerate.
Late night. Let's call it late night bailout special.
Yeah,
that's one. That's what I've always liked in that spot, and I still can't find that stupid quote. I got too many notes here. All right, here it is. Mike McIntyre. We know we're going to have to win a ton of Pac-12 games to win the conference, to win the Pac-12 South. USC's a Pac-12 South team. That makes it a little bit bigger. They're all big, But if you can beat a Pac-12 South opponent on the road, puts them a notch behind you, is a huge game for us. McIntyre's good as a dog. Colorado's 5-0. Colorado is catching 7. I want to lay it with USC. I do, and I'm not going to get to the betting window. I can already tell I'm not going to get there with USC. But from a spot standpoint, this is a USC spot. USC coming off a bye. You know, what's been the problem for the Trojans this season? There have been a lot of them. But the biggest problem, I have to say, penalties. You know, they've shot themselves in the foot. They rank 124th in the country in penalties per game. That's not good. And they spent the whole Clay Helton spent the whole bye week. We got to clean that up. Emphasis on discipline during the bye. But the other reports coming out of the bye is that JT Daniels is looking really good. And the offensive line, you know, they've given up more sacks already this year than they allowed for the entirety in 2017. Word out of Trojans camp this week is, A, they're healthy. B, Daniels looks scary. C, the offensive line is protecting him. So here's Colorado fat and happy and ranked and talking about winning Pac-12 South and coming off a big win. The Buffs are okay. They're a good team. You know, they're not a great team. You know, what's in between Colorado and Pitt? Not that much. You know what I mean? We just talked about Pitt. Colorado's better. You know, they got Chenot's a playmaker.
They're 5-0.
Yeah, I know. Their record is, from a power rating standpoint, there's not a huge difference. I mean, there's a difference. Don't get me wrong. Colorado's better than Pitt, but Colorado's not going on 12-0 and winning and sweeping the Pac-12. That's not who they are. USC has speed edges, size edges, and talent edges all over the field, and it's a Trojan spot coming off the bye. So if I'm playing, I'm laying. I do not want Colorado in this ball game. And note which books are moving to 7.5. I'll give you a hint. It's not the books that are catering to recreational players. It's only the books that are catering to wise guys.
Good stuff, Teddy. And guys, remember that 7-day all-access pass? Teddy Half at checkout, $50 off his 7 days. 72% NFL, 59% CFB year to date. Moving down here, 157, 158 Army at San Jose State. Looks like Army opened 17, bet down to 15 pretty much across the board. Some 14.5s in Vegas. 50.5 the total, Teddy. How would you look to bet this one in San Jose?
Yeah, it feels really lofty. You know, it's a big price for Army, and not that I have nothing bad to say about Army. And I think that, you know, when it comes to their level of execution and their attention to detail for 4 quarters, there's a reason Army's been covering a whole lot of point spreads. But, geez, in this point spread range, you know, I mean, it's not like they got to win by margin. And the last 2 weeks, San Jose State, you know, took Hawaii to the wire. And last week I was bitching and moaning about the loss to Colorado State. Colorado State's win in that game. There was enough to like in that third quarter from the Spartans. They're not a good team, but there are pieces that are reasonable. You know what I mean? They've got some talent level. Josh Love looks decent at QB. You know, he threw for 451 against Hawaii, caught fire. Didn't have that level last week, but threw for 3 touchdowns. You know, Tyler Nevins can run the football. It's San Jose State was hopeless last year. They're not hopeless this year, which makes me think this point spread is like again, I can understand why the money's come on the home dog. They've been playing competitive football, and Army, it's, you know, laying 2 touchdowns on the road. That's not the role I want Army in. I'll put it that way.
Teddy, another big one in the Pac-12. Washington at Oregon. Looks like Washington laying 3.5 or 3. Some of the 3.5s have been bought out here. 57.5 the total, Teddy. The last 2 years, Washington 108, Oregon 24. Does that change here?
Yes, I don't think they're going to kill them like that this year. I don't. And it's worth noting that this got bet all the way down to 3 everywhere, and then popped up. Some of the books popped back to 3.5 earlier this morning. As we record on Thursday, we saw some, I'd say, a significant sharp action on Washington, and I can understand it. I really can. You know, if we talk about the best coaches in all of college football, or not, whatever, the best coaches in any sport, what makes Bill Belichick different from the rest of the NFL head coaches? Ask around, and everyone will tell you the same thing. Attention to detail, the little details. Greg Popovich, how do you do all that in San Antonio? Attention to detail, little details matter. That's Chris Peterson. Chris Peterson's all about the little details. And again, last week, they didn't play great against UCLA. They kind of fell asleep in the second half of that ball game. Looking forward to this one. Peterson, after the game, hey, no panic, no freaking out. We're going to iron out these details and, make sure that our blocking technique is right and that we don't miss that snap count and all the little stuff. That makes, that's a big part of the reason why the Huskies have been as successful as they had. That and, of course, all the NFL talent on that roster. That team's loaded with future NFLers. But one guy they don't have, and I feel like it's a broken record with Washington. Jake Browning's no good. Jake Browning's a stiff. And I see it every week. Browning, he's no better now than he was 3 years ago. He's holding them back. He misses. He's not hitting receivers in stride. He's missing open guys. It's when you're trying to lay points on the road and you don't have the better quarterback, that can be a concern. And of course, with Oregon, from a spot standpoint, great spot for the Ducks. They're healthy, very healthy, coming off a bye, coming off a win. Herbert's been as good as, Herbert's got a chance to be the number one overall pick in the draft. He's been really special. And again, they have a loss on their schedule, which is the game that they won, the Stanford game. Just as, if you bet them, they didn't win. But from when you re-handicap the game, you understand Oregon, was the better team, and they were on the fluky end of it. I don't know if the Ducks are ready to make this kind of a statement in Cristobal's first year. I really don't know. I feel like there's something of a class difference on the defensive side of the football, but boy, Leavitt's defense is flying around. They forced all these turnovers against Cal. To do that against Browning and company, they're certainly live to pull off the upset. This is not a game I'm going to bet. I'm fascinated to watch it, but I won't be at the betting window.
Yeah, Teddy, I think, Washington struggling against UCLA, they're going to see that same spread, attack, not the exact same, but I think they're up against it against these Ducks. I mean, Washington just 2-4 ATS. And the one win they had was against Utah, and that game played a lot closer than that final score indicates. I think Washington's in trouble here, Teddy. Oregon off a bye, catching points at home. I think the Ducks are the side, man.
Well, I'll say this. I think side and total are related in this ballgame. If Washington's going to cover, Oregon can't get in the 30s. Washington correlates with under, Oregon correlates with over.
Good stuff there. We got one game left, guys, and before we get to it, remember the half-off code TEDDYHALF to get a 7-day all-access. That's NFL, college football, and NBA starting next week for half off. That's TEDDYHALF at checkout. Last game here, Teddy, some action. 161-162 Ohio at Northern Illinois. Heavy under money here. Northern Illinois has been in an under run. I do know that. 51.5 the total right now. Northern Illinois laying 3.5 or 4 at home. What do you got on this one?
And I appreciate that offer. We always say don't never buy a play. Don't buy my plays. Don't. If you want to sign up, get a weekend package, get a weekly package, and here, what do you get? A week for $49 or something? And we got NBA starting next week, so you get that as well. It is a really good deal. I don't know if you're going to get a better deal than that on the play. So I encourage you, take advantage of that offer right now at sportsmemo.com. And I hate to tell you this. I mean, of all the games we talked about, I might have the least opinion on this. Ohio can put the biscuit in the basket, but Rourke is banged up. Nathan Rourke's been making a lot of plays, and last week he got hurt. And they barely squeaked out a win as 11.5 point chalk. The offense didn't move the football particularly well. They turned it over. When Rourke is healthy, this is a guy who's making plays all over the field. And Ohio can put up points in bunches. If he's not healthy, I mean, the Huskies, their quarterback play hasn't been good. I mean, what are they? I don't think they're averaging 20 points a game this season. They haven't gotten to 400 yards yet. It's been a very anemic offense for the Huskies, but defensively, the squad's dynamite. So you have one squad with a good offense, but the best player on offense is banged up. You have the other squad that can't win a shootout, but has been playing elite level defense really in every game, even the game against Florida State, where they created 4 turnovers in that contest. Utah only scored 17 against them, only got to 350 yards. Iowa only got to 350 yards against them. And the Huskies' defense is real. So is the Bobcats' offense. Easy pass for me.
Good stuff, Teddy. We'll have you on next week. And, guys, we'll be right back with next guest on the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast. Remember, Teddy Half for half off of his 7-day all access. We'll be right back with you.